Last weekend when I was at Regional Assembly, I heard one of my colleagues refer to the sound of stirring children or crying as, what did he say? The sonic evidence of new life, and what a blessing it was. What a lovely reminder of that this morning. So I use this word, beloved community, quite a bit. It's our theme for the month of May at Tapestry. And I don't think I could have come up with a better political or theological concept to consider in this particular moment in our country and its divisiveness. It's not an easy thing to define. Dr. King himself didn't really define it. He just used it to sort of poetically describe a struggle for justice and reconciliation. It comes up several times in his writings, and this month I want to break it down a little bit into what I see as three pieces of beloved community. As I understand it, these three parts are what we'll focus on today, which is an understanding of our mutual liberation. We're much more effective at creating justice and changing the world when we cross our differences and work together. And the spiritual well-being of the powerful and the physical well-being of marginalized people seems to be tied together. We need each other to survive, physically and spiritually. The second piece of beloved community that I'll talk about more next week is our commitment to nonviolence. We heard a little bit about that in our children's story today. We're all familiar with nonviolence as a political strategy. In the beloved community, though, nonviolence is a spiritual discipline. It's the task of each and every one of us to cultivate a heart that responds with curiosity and compassion before fear and anger. Nonviolence isn't just about controlling our fists, it's also about attending to our words and our thoughts. And the third piece, I think, of Dr. King's beloved community is that it's an aspiration. Our goal of welcoming and caring for our neighbors is never complete. In his day, Dr. King had limits to his vision. He expanded the civil rights movement to advocate for poor and working class folks, and not many people know he welcomed the support of a gay man into his strategy team. But he was by no means a feminist. The transgender community was nowhere near his radar. We can only assume that Dr. King's dream would have grown wider and wider over time, just as our vision of inclusion is forever widening. Those are the three pieces that I'm going to talk about this month for beloved community. But today I want to focus on our mutual liberation. The Reverend Teresa Soto is a Unitarian Universalist minister. She's a woman of color who lives with disabilities. And she explains it this way. She says, all of us need all of us to make it. If that were just a few words shorter, it would have been the title of this sermon. All of us need all of us to make it. In some instances, we need help from those who have power. We need their generosity and their political will as accomplices to create justice. And in some instances, we need teachers whose lives are different from our own. We need brave people who are willing to show us where we've gone wrong, where we've misunderstood others, and maybe even hurt them. We need teachers. Last month, I heard a man tell about the teachers that he had encountered and his gratitude for these teachers. I was invited, it may have been 2 months ago now, to speak on a panel called LGBTQ and the Church. I sent out an email invitation to folks as well. The discussion was focused on understanding how the Christian church had failed the LGBT community and how we might move forward. The panelists came from a great range of folks. Some of us were LGBT, some were Christian, some were clergy, some were white. It was a really well-composed panel. And each of us brought stories from our own experience. The one story that stood out, I think, to everyone that day came from the Reverend Danny Cortez. He's a Southern Baptist minister here in Orange County. It's important to understand the Southern Baptist Convention is one of the largest and most explicitly anti-gay denominations in the United States. There are a lot of little fringe groups that are more aggressive in their language and action, but the Southern Baptists are very mainstream and very anti-gay. So Reverend Danny Cortez, the Southern Baptist pastor, talked to us about his long and difficult journey of coming to support the community. Within his church, he had had several gay and lesbian members seek counseling with him. He did what he was supposed to do. He taught them that it was a sin. He told them that they could change and referred them to Christian counseling or reparative therapy. He was kind, but told them in no uncertain terms that their sexual orientation was sinful and that they would go to hell if it weren't dealt with. After several of these encounters, he became more curious. He wanted to be certain about delivering this harsh news, so he embarked on a journey. For years, he studied rigorously, and he bravely sought LGBT people to get to know them, really know them as people. The journey led him to a very difficult conclusion. There was nothing inherently sinful about being LGBT. His denomination didn't see it that way, though. After preaching his truth, the Southern Baptist Convention rejected him, and about half of his congregation rejected him. While the lay leaders fired him from his job, a small but faithful group followed to start a new congregation where they could follow their Christian calling to build a beloved community and welcome all people. In the process of telling us about his journey, Pastor Danny told us how grateful he was to those LGBT people who had been patient with him, who had been brave enough to allow him to get to know them. He came to understand that they were his teachers. They saved him from hurting more people. They saved him from one of the gravest sins of destroying faithful people's relationship with God. Pastor Danny, the very people he had rejected, were the ones he needed most to understand the teachings of Jesus. Now, all of us need all of us to make it. Whether making it means salvation or enlightenment or being safe or having the opportunity to thrive, all of us need all of us to make it. Of course, stereotyping and distrust isn't directed only at those on the margins, those who have less power. I recently ran across a Facebook post that really rubbed me the wrong way. It was from some progressive media group that spews these things out. I don't even remember exactly what it said, but it basically suggested that all wealthy people are greedy and earn their wealth by exploiting others. I know you have seen these messages on Facebook or other arenas. Some of that language was used to critique the 1%. if I'm honest, occasionally I harbor resentment toward people who obviously have more wealth than I do, without knowing a thing about them. I might be inclined to judge them for the car that they drive or the designer label. I put those people in a kind of category that's different from me, and I assign that category a certain story that's about greed and exploitation. I assume all sorts of things about them because they're privileged. And I don't do it all the time. But sometimes, on a bad day, that nasty part of me comes out. And I don't think I'm alone. But all of us need all of us to make it. It's true that there are some very wealthy people who, as my Southern family might say, they've got more money than they've got sense, or they've got more money than they've got morals. It's also true that many prophetic people with wealth and power have sided with love. They've given their support to marginalized people, and that support is critical in bringing about some equity in our world. I had to Google this week. The Gates Foundation has given $41.3 billion in grants. Bill Gates is only 62 years old. I don't know when the foundation started, but it wasn't that long ago. Warren Buffett has given away $46 billion since the year 2000. That is a wild amount of money for two people. To me, the even bolder move from them and a handful of other billionaires was pleading with the federal government to increase their tax rates so that wealth might be more evenly distributed through the economy, so that we might have a stable middle class. That's not greed, that's financial success. There's a big difference. When jealousy for their success seeps into our hearts, it's very easy to dismiss those people. We need some of that 1%. We need people with wealth and power to be accomplices in the journey to mutual liberation. One of the questions that sometimes comes up when we talk about that kind of giving is it enough? They have so much. Is it enough? It's a very hard question to answer. Is it enough? When is it ever enough work? As a parent, as a lover, as an activist, as a friend, how much work is enough? How much financial generosity is enough? Are we to literally follow Jesus and give away all our belongings and join some holy community of simplicity? I don't think so. I think it's enough when our giving is rooted in the awareness that all of us need all of us to make it. It's enough when our giving is for the sake of our mutual liberation. Beloved community doesn't focus so much on the question of giving enough. It focuses more on working together to get there together. I'm not in the position to judge others for giving enough. I'm in a position to be tremendously grateful for some of those wealthy and powerful folks. I'm also in a position to be tremendously grateful for the patient teachers, the people of color, the women, the working class and poor people who have helped me learn how to be more respectful of their experiences. Most of us have been on both sides of this relationship. We've been teachers from the margins, and we've given our money and social capital to help. We've been both teachers and accomplices. Now, too often, especially today, I hear justice described as a turning of the tables, where disenfranchised folks gain power over historical oppressors. Now, that revenge-based vision is actually the opposite of what Dr. King described as beloved community. He started describing this in Selma early on in his career when people started saying, "What's going on here? What's he up to?" And he explained very clearly, after the Montgomery bus boycotts, Dr. King said, "The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community." It's this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponent into friends. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. Our vision has to be bigger than turning the tables. If in empowering marginalized communities we create opposite systems of oppression, then we have failed. Only in relationship do we find our way from brokenness to wholeness. Now, most of this sermon is not news to anyone. You know that marginalized communities have something to teach us all about compassion and loving. You know that those with abundant wealth are not necessarily greedy. In fact, their generosity can be leveraged to build the world we dream about. I guess what I'm suggesting is that we find more space in our hearts for gratitude for our neighbors. Not just the ones that give so generously, but also the ones who have difficult lessons to teach us about more expansive love. Let us be grateful for our neighbors, because all of us need all of us to make it. Amen.